I'm gonna take, of all Wonder Woman things, the invisible jet. Do I get one of those now that I've recorded this?
I always wanted to be in a comic book. I watched cartoons when I was a kid. It lit fire in my imagination.
You know, I'm a New Yorker. There were some aspects of being a tough woman that I thought I could bring to it.
The great thing about playing villains is actually that it's very liberating.
I wanted to play Hippolyta because I could be the queen.
Wonder Woman had a very unusual history for the early comics characters.
Well, Wonder Woman made her first appearance in All-Star Comics #8. That was her big debut, and she hasn't stopped appearing in DC Comics since. She was introduced in 1941 at a time when woman's role was to be at home. But I think also if you reflect on the times, you're getting into the period of World War II where so many men were being shipped overseas to fight in war that women were taking on the roles of men.
All of a sudden women were abandoning traditional roles, and you had, Rosie the Riveter, and you had women building aircraft carriers. It all of a sudden made sense to have a female superhero who could stand toe-to-toe with Superman and Batman.
She rose to that level of prominence during that period of time, but more importantly, when women were supposed to return to their traditional roles following the conclusion of the war, Wonder Woman was still published and was still a prominent superhero.
Wonder Woman was created by a man named William Moulton Marston back in the early 1940s. I think it's kind of interesting, the man who created the Lasso of Truth also actually created the real-life lie detector. At the time, the idea of a female superhero in comics was really kind of a novelty.
Comic books were very much a boys' game. Every comic book publisher had like a line of romance comics that were thought of as girls' comics.
Marston had the idea of, well, women can be heroes. Let's do a comic book with a female superhero.
He had a very, very different, very complex view of how men and women should relate. He liked the idea of strong women. One of the interesting ramifications of how Wonder Woman came about is that because Marston was a much more established writer, he was drawing on a different generation of influences than most of the writers who were creating the early comic book characters. He was brought up in a more classical literary tradition. The mythology of the Greeks and Romans was probably a childhood passion of his.
When I read the script, I was really excited to see that this was sort of very much the origin story.
Wonder Woman's story is actually fairly unique. She was created out of desperate love by her mother. She was, literally a gift from the gods.
When you move further into the story, you get into a little more of the traditional superhero sensibilities, where you have, instead of the damsel in distress, you have the man in distress. Steve Trevor crash lands on the island of women. This is an island that has rejected man and lived isolated from mankind. Diana steps up, accepts him, protects him.
I want to be the one to take him back, Mother.
You do not have the experience necessary to lead such an expedition. As in ancient times, a contest will determine our emissary to the outside world.
She enters into the contest of bullets and bracelets, which she was forbidden by her mother to join. And she chooses to leave the island that she's the only place she's known her whole entire life, to be representative of the Amazons in the world of man.
As is the custom, our emissary will don the colors of the foreign nation as a sign of respect and peace. Amazon bracelets, formed from shards of Zeus's shield by Hephaestus himself. Finally, the lasso of truth, bequeathed to us by the goddess Hestia.
It's a wonderful little tale that's crafted at the start. It's a great springboard for what the character becomes later on down the line.
Wonder Woman's always been the strongest of the female DC characters, and so her popularity definitely helped pave the way for other female characters.
I believe that comics set the tone, set the styles, set the sensibilities. She is non-traditional superhero storytelling at a time that everybody else was starting to build very traditional style superheroes.
DC Comics has always been very progressive in its depiction of females. When you look at the greater proportion of female characters in comic books, you look at the ones who are independent and strong, there's a preponderance of DC characters, whether it's Lois Lane as, a prize-winning reporter, whether it's Catwoman, who is, Batman's equal in a lot of ways. These are, progressive ideas, and then at the top of the heap there you have Wonder Woman.
Something in the magic of those early stories was very appealing to a number of the young women of the time who went on to be part of the liberation movement. So when Gloria Steinem was editing Ms. Magazine at its launch 30 years later, and finally remembered Wonder Woman and suggested putting her on the cover, she wasn't booed out of the office by the rest of her compatriots. It made sense to them all.
When Wonder Woman first came out, she was probably a pretty big symbol of feminism.
In addition to being a role model for, girls who really didn't have any female role models, she could be a role model to boys as well.
She's playing with the big boys. And girls can look at that and say, hey, I can do it too.
Everything that sort of we're not allowed to have. You're not allowed to embrace your sensuality and your sexuality and be strong at the same time. They're supposed to be in contradiction. And that's exactly what she is. She was a princess, she was an ambassador, she was a warrior, and she was also this woman. And she was like that angel with a flaming sword.
I thought this was very true to the original story. What I really liked is that this brings more of the comic book. The Wonder Woman series just showed her like in her adult phase.
We've assembled a really amazingly stellar cast. Kerry Russell stars as Wonder Woman.
I'm an Amazon, Steve. We're prepared from birth to give our lives in battle.
I was sent to kill the Amazon.
You believe that this girl can actually kick a lot of butt.
Playing second fiddle to Kerry, that's a wonderful fiddle to play. I've done it before, I'll do it again.
He was really a perfect choice. He's got the perfect comedic timing.
I've made a hobby out of fleeing chasing women. When you get a phone call saying, how'd you like to be Steve Trevor, the new Wonder Woman? Yeah, that'd be great. He seems to be a pretty normal guy, hanging out with Wonder Woman.
Remarkable. The advanced brainwashing that has been perpetuated upon their very femininity.
How about we stay focused on that other social evil for now? God of War.
You've waited patiently, my friends. But the time has come once again to spread my gospel of death. Now let the natural state of mistrust and betrayal run through the soul of every man.
Ares is played by Alfred Molina. He did an amazing job. He's got this real quality to his voice that can sound so suave and yet so menacing at the same time.
A centuries-long courtship finally culminated in a kiss.
I'm very proud that I belong to a very honourable tradition of British actors who come to Hollywood to play the bad guys. And I think at some point in the history of American films and American screen work, I think there was the idea that the British accent somehow was, I don't know, was villainous.
Artemis is just the hard, tough Amazon. She doesn't take any crap.
So the Queen's kid, the hot chick?
Princess Diana.
Yeah, her. So what's her deal?
Her deal is that I will personally castrate you if you come within 5 yards of her. I relish sort of the opportunity to be able to take on a woman who's very strong, but for the reasons that she's strong. I think mostly, if anything, I was pulling from is just, thinking of the warriors in my life. My mom is 6 foot tall. I think of my mom and I think of her as being a strong woman. And that's a wonderful thing. She's our Amazon.
The thing about Wonder Woman in animation is that even though we had the character in our Justice League series, Superman had his own series and Batman had his own series, and we'd never really done a Wonder Woman series, and I always felt like that was like a kind of a glaring omission.
I was just glad to be able to do a movie with a girl in it for once. I'm tired of drawing men in spandex.
I'd argue that it's probably the best Wonder Woman origin story that's been done to date in any medium.
I think fans will love this one. There's a lot of action. It's a new look for the character.
She's constantly a trailblazer. Wonder Woman is just as relevant today as she was when she was created.